Welcome to Vet Life Reimagined. I have an exciting and timely guest for you this week. The week that this episode is being published is the week of the Veterinary Innovation Summit. I love this conference, and I have to miss it this year because I'm less than 30 days until my due date. But today I have the Vice Chair of the Veterinary Innovation Council, Dr. Jennifer Welser. I first knew Jen when she was the Global Chief Medical Officer at Mars Veterinary Health. She was also the Chief Strategy Officer at City Vet and is now taking the shared ownership model from general practice in City Vet to specialty and emergency pet care as president of Arista Advanced Pet Care. The first hospital will open in 2025. Dr. Welser has done many different things in veterinary medicine, from being an ophthalmologist to inventing and selling products to industry and innovation councils. She is absolutely incredible, so let's get to the conversation with Dr. Jennifer Welser. When did you know you wanted to get into veterinary medicine?
I think like most veterinarians at a very young age, it's kind of a fascinating thing between us that we all have in common. And it starts with, you bring anything dead by the roadside home and you're always wanting to sort of save things. So I knew very, very young that I wanted to be a veterinarian. I did have a tiny little journey off when I took a year off between undergrad and veterinary school. And I thought, well, maybe I should go to human medical school for, a period of a relatively short time. And thankfully, I was like, no, I've been meant for veterinary school the whole time.
And I liked that you said it was because you went to work at, I think, a dude ranch or something that kind of...
I did. I told you that. So I was in between undergrad and veterinary school. I went and worked on a dude ranch. And honestly, it was sort of foolish looking back on it, but I took creative books and I thought I was going to study for the MCATs while I was working on a dude ranch, and I never cracked a book. And so there was a little bit of it like, well, you don't have to take the MCATs. If you go to veterinary school, you can take the GREs. You don't have to study for the GREs. That's more just like what you know. You don't have to like go back and buff up on like organic chemistry or anything. So it was a bit of a weird way back, but it was all meant to be for sure.
Yeah. And then, so you went to vet school and this has been a dream. So did you have an idea of what that would look like for you? And did that change throughout vet school?
Yeah, that I didn't actually, which is not so typical. I think, well, this is an interesting little tidbit. Our midway through veterinary school party, we have like a halfway party and there's just silly awards that are given out. And I was voted least likely to ever practice veterinary medicine by my class. I know my parents were thrilled, but I think it was sort of like, I don't really know what I wanted to do. I thought maybe I'd go get a law degree because patent law sounded interesting with everything kind of happening, or it was interested in public health and maybe I should get a master's in public health. And I think somehow like there is a little bit of a pigeonholing that like, well, you're going to go into practice. You're going to be either a small animal practitioner, a mixed food animal, equine. And it was very much the vision of practice, or then maybe academia. And none of that kind of really resonated with me quite so much. So I think that's why I wasn't really all that sure. But then I credit a summer job that got me interested in ophthalmology in particular. So then I was like, oh, that's what I want. I want to be an ophthalmologist.
And this is a really important story because there was like a connection.
Yeah, so for sure. So I was in vet school in the mid-90s and the concept of specialty private practice was sort of just coming out of the universities. For the most part, people would still go to a university setting if they're going to do a referral to a specialist. And so in the mid-90s, these hospitals that were standalone, multi-specialty hospitals were becoming more popular. And so I had a summer job with Abbott Labs in North Chicago. And I, through a connection of my father's, I lived above a veterinary ophthalmology practice. Basically, I got a cheap apartment so I could live above the practice while I had my summer job. And I just had to like do the night treatments on the animals when I was there. This is a small tidbit for everybody a little younger than me. At the time, we didn't have things like Google and you can check stuff. And I was in between my first year and hadn't had any clinic time because the programs were a little more traditional in terms of like, here's your didactics and then you go to clinics. And so I show up there and I go down the first night to like, oh, what do I have to do to treat the animal's eyes? And all the stuff is like, BIDOU, SIDOS. And I was like, I don't know what that means. Like, I had no way to like Google it. I phone a friend, ended up, calling him and sort of saying like, I'm really sorry, you're going to regret renting me this apartment, but you have to explain what I'm supposed to be doing here. But anyway, fast forward, great summer job, loved living above it and got more exposed to specialty practice and the ophthalmology world in particular, because it was all species. I really liked horses, but didn't really know that I wanted to be an equine vet. I really like surgery, but didn't want to not do sort of medical stuff. I like sort of the exotic zoo animal. And, I don't really love the deaf component. So ophthalmology was like, oh, this is ticking all of my boxes. And so I ended up that particular hospital that I lived above, they built a residency for me. They was like, get yourself an internship and then we'll build a residency for you. So I came back and did my ophthalmology training with them.
Very interesting. And didn't you know one of the events? Like, wasn't there a connection there too as well?
Yes. So Dr. Gretchen Schmidt, and she's a, ophthalmologist, sort of a renowned ophthalmologist, Sam Venisi, her partner as well. But as a kid, because I'm a second generation veterinarian. My dad's a veterinarian and he was in academia for a while and he was the dean at Michigan State. So when I was a kid, we moved before I went to Michigan State. We moved across to the other side of the state. But when I was a young kid, Gretchen would ride her horse up like behind our house. And I was always waiting and excited to see her. And so I knew her. And then my 5th grade science project, thanks to her and support from her, was why do animals' eyes shine at night? So I clearly I didn't even think about it until much later when I was like, wait a minute, now I'm an ophthalmologist training with her. And when I was, call it 7 or 8, I was, waiting for her to show up with a horse and hopefully she'd let me ride for a little while. And she helped me with my 5th grade science project. So all these things clearly kind of, were all meant to be.
Yes. And very cool that you could do the residency there as well. Then you went on to work at Angel, which is a ginormous, very well-known facility in Boston. So what was it like leaving residency and then getting into being a full ophthalmologist?
Yeah, it was. So I'm super grateful for the residency, incredibly high case volume, and it was a standalone ophthalmology practice. It was in partnership a little bit with the University of Illinois Chicago's human ophthalmology program. So I got to spend some time with MDs. That can always go both ways. Sometimes they're like, let the veterinarian in, and sometimes they're like, oh, this is fascinating. And fortunately, they thought it was fascinating. So I got exposed to lots of different things through the residency, and it was extremely ophthalmology focused, which I loved. But then moving to Angel Memorial in a much bigger setting, you can get the training opportunities with interns and residencies there, and a huge multi-specialty facility. I really realized that I like the multi-specialty environment, and I'd worked after that in a couple different settings, but really feel like that whole collegialness and the quality of care that kind of comes with it was great. I mean, Angel's big, it's navigating a big, slow beast in some ways, but it was a great experience.
Yeah, I hadn't really stopped to think about it, but that might have been one of your earlier experiences working with a very large organization, lots of moving parts. And so I don't know if you took any observations there forward.
That's funny. Interesting connection. I don't know that I did. I mean, I certainly saw you became much more aware of like departments and, the medical director and the leadership structure. And so, I was aware of it. And I was only there about a year before I ended up going to the West Coast. But it is interesting, actually, to think I probably did get some exposure in the leadership component that goes with larger organizations.
As you said, you moved again. So you've moved a lot. You moved complete other side of the country to California. So what called you to move and start being more owner side of things?
Yes. Well, first of all, a guy called me to move. So there's a little bit of that. You throw in a marriage and a divorce, but I moved to the West Coast, and it was interesting because when I first got out there, I was honestly sort of relief and as an ophthalmologist, just sort of a few other practices and seeing styles and setups of the business types and everything. And ended up partnering with a woman, Tina Burling, who had a standalone ophthalmology practice. And we, had a couple locations we were supporting and trained a resident. And then I ended up moving up to the city. That was a little bit more down on the peninsula south of San Francisco, and then moved up to the city. And that's when I basically independently contracted ophthalmology services to multi-specialty hospital in San Francisco, as well as one in Los Angeles. That kind of got thrown in through when I was at Auburn for my internship, a resident I was an intern, he was a resident, was down in this LA practice, and ophthalmologists were in like high demand. And so I was able to do my practice in San Francisco, fly down and to LA once a week and manage a facility there for ophthalmology. And it was great. I mean, 3 years I did it once a week. It was pretty doable. I mean, this was pre 9/11. Travel was really easy. I could take my surgical pack on the plane with me. So it was a bit of a different world in terms of travel, but it definitely exposed me to then essentially two main multi-specialty 24/7 facilities, San Francisco and in the sort of Glendale, Pasadena area in Los Angeles. And I loved that working environment. And I, frankly, didn't really want to partner with the San Francisco group. I really liked the LA group, but then I got recruited to move to New York City to start the ophthalmology department for what would then become Blue Pearl. But at the time, I would get letters all the time as an ophthalmologist during that phase. I'm sure it still happened, or we were just in high demand. And so that letter that I got, fortunately, had New York as the return address. And I was like, well, that's interesting. Because if it had, something else in the middle of the country, I probably just would have thrown it away. But I opened it up and started the conversation. And I had always wanted to live in New York City. So I put all my ophthalmology equipment on a pallet, shipped it across the country, and said, I'm going to start your ophthalmology department for you. So it was a really, really unique time and a great experience.
Yeah. For anyone who's thinking about specializing and interested in ophthalmology, I happen to know a few. Is there any tips or advice that you would potentially give someone in that interest?
We are still a pretty small specialty, and there's no question that so much of veterinary medicine in general, and maybe we can talk about this later. I'm a little passionate about veterinarians being better at networking and understanding power relationships. And that stuff matters when you're trying to, get into training programs and get exposed to make sure, is this an area of interest? Frankly, also, do you have some of the fine motor skills? I mean, I've worked with lots of internists that are like, I can hardly put a catheter in. And so there are little things that you need to get exposed to make sure oh yeah, this is a good fit for me. That works. And so making the relationships with ophthalmologists and connections and talking to them and observing and, trying things on your own is definitely important.
Yeah, it's a very good point too. And even if you are a high demand specialty where you're getting letters, if you're not networking and putting yourself out there, you may be missing opportunities that you may prefer over just letting the letters come to you, I guess.
Yeah. No, absolutely right. Take charge of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So you were excited about this opportunity to start an ophthalmology department with Blue Pearl. And I think I saw that you started also an intern and residency program. So you were really building up a good service. Do you mind sharing a little bit of your experience, what you were learning that kind of also gets you to the next stage?
Yeah. There are definitely pieces of what I'm doing now that I think back to that time in New York that are really, really, really relevant. So at the time, this was, doors were opening on a large multi-specialty 24/7 ER facility in the middle of New York City, which has been unheard of in its own way. But it also means everybody that came in to start this, we all were taking a chance on this new, exciting project. Many people were from New York. Many were not from New York. So, some sort of already had a caseload and some knowledge of the general practitioners. But we all came in very much with this sense of ownership and responsibility for the success of what this practice was going to be. And so the culture of it and the way we treated each other, I mean, no bad eggs were allowed in the environment. And so you just realize how important it is to have the relationship with the people and that you all are really invested. We have the opportunity to invest in Blue Pearl. Again, at the time it was called NYC Veterinary Specialist, but I mean, none of us understood it. And every now and then you get this little distribution check and you're like, oh, well, that's fun. But we had no real understanding of what it was. But I think because we all started together and sort of had this sense of ownership, it made a huge difference for us. And, it was a big hospital and we were growing. And I ended up as a co-medical director, Tim Roach, an oncologist who'd been practicing in the city for a long time. And then we started the internship program. And I don't think that I thought of it as oh, look at me, I'm on a leadership path. And that's what's really filling my bucket. It was more sort of just the excitement and the opportunity and always sort of being we should do this. And, we should build this program. And then I probably did start to sort of realize that I like the people part of leadership because it's its own, I mean, this probably sounds bad, but its own sport in its own way that it's similar to if you're a good practitioner, when you go in and you're talking to a client, right? You can just what does this client need from me? Well, how do I need to explain something? Detail, no detail, emotionally connect, keep it logical. And your goal is to sort of get to the best, hopefully the best sort of treatment plan and outcome that you can that fits the situation in front of you. So there's a sport to it where you feel how do you make somebody comfortable? So same thing with the people leadership part where you feel oh my gosh, this person is I don't know, they'll make it up. Like maybe they're just churning through technicians. They're just like, always like, you can't find me a good technician. So, there's a good technician tree out back that we're supposed to just keep, bringing them into, instead of like, you play a very large role in the relationship with the technician, and they're feeling valued and used for their skills, and like they have opportunity to grow and develop. And so I liked sort of the challenge, and I still do, of having people sort of see, frankly, the impact of their behavior and how it's, nothing is a chance. You need to be intentional about everything.
Yes, it's so funny that you mentioned this, because just last night when I was interviewing another veterinarian, he talked about the example of he's now doing a lot of coaching, and he had someone who had gone through 3 different hospitals and they all had something wrong with them. And he was like, well, maybe stop and think, maybe, do you have a part in that? Self-awareness and understanding our impact on the environment around us is very important for everybody, but especially for people of any type of leadership position.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I also, I'm noticing that as you're like, even back to when you were in Boston at Angel, really noticing that you liked working cross-functionally, lots of different people. And so that's also coming in. I also notice you've worked a lot with interns and residents. So there might be that leadership and teaching interest in you as well. And so Blue Pearl also opens up new opportunities for you. Also in the middle, I think this is really neat too, because I'm kind of curious how these different projects come in. But you actually licensed and sold a therapeutic item that ended up selling it to a company. So that's really unique. How did that come about?
It sounds crazy. One of my passions that we talked about in preparation for this is that, veterinarians are like, I feel like it's such a good education. I love our profession. People are problem solvers. They're super, super smart. They're learners. And so some of this came from like, how did I end up doing some of these wacky things that I did? I, as an ophthalmologist, was always telling people that you should give your cat lysine because it will help. It's a nutritional supplement. It's not like panacea, but it should help decrease the recurrence and severity, especially if you have multi-cat households. All the cats should be on lysine, blah, blah, blah. Easy for me to say as a dog owner. And then I ended up with a cat. And I was like, good Lord, you cannot, like, these are like horse pills from human healthcare for these lysine supplements. And I was trying to crush it and trying to figure out how to get it in this, teeny little cat that we had. And then I felt like, first of all, I felt bad that I had just been saying this and thinking like, come on, everybody, just give these lysine tablets to your pet. What's the problem? And then I started kind of like, okay, there's actually a need here. And so I when I went to Williams Sonoma and I bought a kitchen scale, and then I ordered up some raw lysine powder from a chemical company, and just was trying to figure out, well, how much can you dilute it into? Like, can it dissolve easily enough? And then the only thing that my cat at the time liked was the sort of the malty or fishy flavored hairball gels. And so it's just a process of like, well, actually, maybe get the lysine into the gel. At the time, my husband at the time was well, he still is, but my husband at the time, MBA. And in my mind, all the things that seemed so hard, like, well, God, how would you ever like find it? And all that from his standpoint was super easy. The idea that like I solved a problem and I now have a product would be the harder part. And so very, helpful on how do you get a partner to license it. And then they do all the prototyping and the marketing testing. And it was really, really, really fascinating to learn how all of that works. But it ended up being Enicil, which is, by the way, I love this one. Some big marketing department got together and the product name Enicil turns out to be lysine spelled backwards. But it was Enicil. Originally, it was in one of those like dial-a-dose packages where, you look at dewormer kind of thing that we would think for large animal, and you would sort of push the plunger and that would be the dose of lysine. And it then since got, simplified, and it's just sort of like a tablespoon or pumps of the gel. It was a licensed deal. I will also say I learned a lot about the process and what it is as one individual to kind of have this license and deal. And the company essentially was like, the product's doing really well, and we're in this licensed agreement with this person, and we're having to pay a royalty that we frankly don't really want to pay anymore. And so it got a little bit, and it was just a situation where like, yeah, I am one person. I'm not going to lawyer up and drag this out. But, I had a nice little chunk of money that helped me, buy frankly a down payment on my first home, which is, hard to like save the down payment piece. So while I, on the one hand, can be bitter about like, oh, I really should have fought that, and the product is doing so well. On the other hand, I had a great time. I learned a ton, and allowed me to buy my first home.
Yeah. Oh, and my goodness, I'm sure you can pull that into learning all sorts of business things going forward. And I also know you're part of the Veterinary Innovation Council, so maybe have a heart for other people who are being entrepreneurs and starting things like like this as well. So,
Yeah.
and I think it's great to empower veterinarians too, that we're fantastic problem solvers. And so looking around for needs, and that can be you could start something like that too. It's very doable.
Yeah, no, I really encourage people to think more about that. And it's not to say we should like patent everything we come up with and try to make a bunch of money on products or things, but it's recognizing that we have so much knowledge and we are such good problem solvers, and they can come into products. I mean, my current one that I have a patent on, and I had a couple license deals, a couple partners that along the way. The license deals have fallen through for various solid reasons, but it's a little disposable applicator to apply eye medication. And it came from, clients would come in, and I'm like, one of a few scenarios would be happening. Either like the pet would be like covered in the eye medication, so clearly it's not going that well, or the container would be like suspiciously full, and so it's not going well because they're not doing it. Or like it would be like they lost the top, the container is disgusting, as if it's been rolling around in the garden or something. And so it was like, okay, how do I help solve this problem? And take your medication, fill it in this nice little soft silicone single-use applicator, and be able to take it to the eye. So I'm not over that one. I feel like I need more time and more energy to sort of pick it back up. But it's still, I'm sure veterinarians on a regular basis have this little like, oh, this is how I solved for that. Or something in the back of their head feeling like, man, it would be so much better for patients, clients, if we could just figure out XYZ. And I just encourage people to figure out XYZ. You never know.
Or get with other people who can do the moving parts, like the MBA, who's like, oh yeah, that part's easy.
Right.
And again, like I said, getting into the Blue Pearl system really opened up some other avenues as well for you. And you became chief medical officer of Blue Pearl, and then of course go on to all of Mars Veterinary Health, which is, encompasses a lot and global. So I really appreciated your explanation of kind of finding these roles, because some of these were brand new roles that you kind of had to define. And so what was that process of trying to figure out you personally, what you can contribute, and doing a very big role that you kind of had to come in, define, and propose?
Yeah, no, there are lots of steps along the way. I would like to think that as a profession, we're further along than we are really, but we kind of aren't. I mean, if I back up to the earlier days of Blue Pearl, there still is, but the VISPA, the Veterinary Specialty Practice Alliance. And so large multi-specialty groups that were not in geographically competing areas would kind of get together and share best practices. And, a couple people from each hospital would go. And, for so long, the veterinary, more medical side, or people that were, maybe hospital leaders, but you didn't think of yourself as a business leader, we would attend, but not really feel like it was our right or our position to be able to say anything, because we didn't really understand the business side of it. And so we keep ourselves in this whole like, well, veterinarians aren't good business people, or like, I don't have the degree that then says that I have the knowledge that I should be sharing. So a little bit along the way was sort of taking it, probably took way too long to realize like, I do have something to say. I very well know how this business works. I'm really good with the people part and motivating and sort of seeing the way things come together. So learning to sort of speak up was a big part of it. And so then the step into Blue Pearl, and I think, people ask as if I was like super ambitious and that was my goal. I mean, the job didn't exist at the time, and it was no more of a process other than the two founders, the brothers, Daryl and Neil Shaw. Literally, one of these VISPA meetings came to me, and it was Daryl first, and he said, "Hey, Jen, how would you feel about being the chief medical officer for Blue Pearl?" And I was like, I mean, isn't that kind of what Neil's doing? What are you asking me? And then he's like, yeah, Neil's ready to do something else. We need to like get this role going and build this function. And he's like, talk to Neil. And I talked to Neil, and Neil's like, well, what did Daryl say? And I said, he said to talk to you. And he's like, well, do you want to do it? And so that was it. And then about the biggest thing, I think everybody at the time, I was living in New York City, and my colleagues were like, she's not going to move to Florida. She loves New York City too much. But it was such an opportunity. So of course I moved to Florida and took this, and then realized that the learning from the founders and what that is and the risks that they took to build Blue Pearl was amazing. But then also, like, there isn't any structure. There's nothing that exists. And it was very clear we got to have a medical voice here. I mean, you can build the operations side, and there's these hospitals for the most part that were merging in with Blue Pearl, had long successful histories, but we have to build a medical voice. And how do we support anything from training programs for people who want to, do clinical studies? And we can't just say we practice high quality medicine. How do we make sure that we're, practicing high quality medicine? So all of that kind of came into play, and I was fortunate to have great people along the way that I was working with, but it was still a slog. I literally think back on the times like, my God, did I even say anything when I was in that board meeting? And I'm sure my thought bubble was quite active and frankly full of really valuable things that I should have been saying. But I always felt like, well, it's not really my position. And, you throw in the female part, and it's even worse, right? You're a female veterinarian in a room full of men, most likely, and for a long period of time. I still feel it. Like sometimes I'll say like, well, you should only speak if you really have something really important to say. And while that is true, you really have to kind of push yourself to step into the role. But it gave me the opportunity in Blue Pearl to really kind of say, all right, like this is a bit of a blank slate, and just phenomenally smart people in the hospitals and groups and what we were trying to build and do. So I enjoyed it very much. And then the Mars acquisition came along, and I really didn't know anything about Mars. I guess maybe I knew they did pet food. I didn't really know or understand the relationship with Banfield at the time. And they had been very soon after becoming full owners of Banfield. But I'm very grateful. Mars as a company in general, separate from obviously their history has been more in consumer packaged goods, and the whole veterinary healthcare space was new. And a big portion of my job, in at least initially, was like internally helping understand for the Mars people, like just what exactly this whole veterinary business is, especially in the multi-specialty ER side. But the focus that Mars has on development, people development, leadership development, and at the sort of tail end of my time at Blue Pearl, before I transferred to the Mars role, actually Jeff Klausner, who had been Banfield's chief medical officer, he had sort of encouraged me for this one particular leadership program, Leadership at the Peak, offered by CCL, the Center for Creative Leadership. There are a couple different locations, but in Colorado. And I was supported then by, Mars and Blue Pearl to go to this program. And that was really somehow the first time I realized, like, holy cow, like there's so much that goes into leadership and developing as a person. And it's not just all the books that I've been trying to read and hope that like I'm absorbing them, or I'm like, wait, did that work? Did I try that? So it was formal leadership training. And then you realize how deeply personal a lot of it is. Like you really have to dig deep and reflect and be so intentional about leadership and what you're doing and your style. And an executive coach assigned. So that was my first experience with an executive coach. And I mean, that's amazing experience. You find the right fit. And I've had 3 more major coaches, and that first one was incredibly influential. And then there's another one, a gentleman I worked with for a long period of time, super, super influential for me. So I just was exposed to super cool to build these roles, and I'm excited. And as a veterinarian, you think you're supposed to just figure things out. And so I would go to a book and try to figure things out and try to learn, and realize like, actually, networking and people and learning and feeling like you were not supposed to just know this necessarily. Like you can learn it and you can trial and error a little bit on it.
Yeah. Was there something that you learned about yourself that kind of surprised you during that?
I mean, lots of little things. And some of it is with my one really influential coach, Burke Miller. I went and we had sort of a like 2.5 day, like, more of a deeper dive, and really kind of dug in on like, what do I feel like my purpose is, and what really kind of makes me tick, and like, come up with the sentences and the things that, and I have a piece of paper. I mean, it's literally always with me in my folder, that I will like open it up and read it occasionally. And it's all of the journey that I kind of went on, and learning some of the like, oh, I mean, I really do like to be liked, and being liked can probably get in the way. But what's more important to me than being liked is being respected. And so how do I reframe? And so one of the things that I run through personally all the time is strong, fair, liked or not, respected. And so if I'm stressed going to a big meeting or something's going on, I will say that to myself. I'm like, okay, be strong. Back to my version of don't think you don't have anything to say. It is your place to speak up. Be fair. Always be fair. It's not about me. It's not about any one thing. Be fair. It's nice to be liked, but it's an or not. They might not. But ultimately, then you leave feeling like, but it was respected.
I think that's really important because, what we're talking about is I so believe that we need veterinarians in places all over because we do bring this really unique perspective, especially when it comes to animal health, right? And so I want people to feel like they can speak up. And also there is that opportunity to constantly learn and not necessarily say, well, this is my lane. I'm just going to stay here. The example that I always think of, and I shared this with you earlier, is Dr. Brent Mayab, who connected us as well. He came in as the veterinary voice on the C-suite leadership team at Royal Canin US. And when he first came in, he's like, oh, I thought I just do my veterinary thing and found out, nope, I have to understand a little bit about each part of these moving parts within a business so that I can actually bring my value in the best way possible. So there's still those opportunities to constantly learn and not put yourself in a bubble and only speak if it comes up with something that what you think is like veterinary medical or something like that. So
yeah. There's a lot that is a bit lingo related, right? And it also took me a long time to realize, like, again, as a good veterinarian, you're very good at what lingo are you using in a certain situation. So I use very different lingo when I'm with my ophthalmology friends, like I'm using all my big ophthalmology words. If I'm with another colleague in a multi-special setting, I'm not using dummied down words, but that's not all of my big ophtho words. So it's very medically focused. And then I'm talking to a client and I'm going to use, okay, what's more my plain language? And plain language with clients can be incredibly variable depending on their background and what they need. And so it's a huge skill that we have. Then you show up in a boardroom or in a room around the table where you've got somebody in marketing or finance and whatever they're in. They haven't spent as much time in their career thinking about, like, what's the lingo and the language I should be using for the audience in front of me. And so we feel like, well, crap, I don't understand what they're saying necessarily. And so then therefore I shouldn't be here. Instead of like, can you repeat that in plain language? Because I'm not a dumb person. And if you lay it out in plain language, I'm like, okay, got it. But like the acronyms and the lingo, like that's your world. So let's all decide that if we're going to move something forward to the best that we can, we all have to speak language that one another understand.
Yeah. Back to when you had to learn what OU and SID meant. It just takes time. And the other thing I also wanted to just highlight and maybe offer or let you offer some support is around getting more women in these positions as well. This is something else I shared with you as I was preparing to go meet this business. And so I was researching this business and looked at their leadership team. And there was one vet and like 3 women and like 8-10 men. And it was veterinary related. So I was like, that's a shame. So being female, I hate to generalize or, I really, really want us to empower each other, especially because we are such a female dominated profession. And so I want people to feel strong and respected and empowered to be in these seats and make a difference here. So maybe from your personal experience and what you would like to encourage other female hopeful leaders, what would you give them?
Yeah, there's a lot there that there are so many statements that you kind of hear that turn out to be incredibly true. That like a guy might read something and be like, I got a couple of those traits. I'm going to just go ahead and show my interest or apply or raise my hand. And a woman might diligently look at and like, well, I don't really have all the skills that they're listing here, so I'm probably not qualified. I'm not even going to inquire or suggest that I might be interested in something because, I wouldn't want to like have it be ridiculous that like, why would I think I was? So we absolutely are our own first problem by not just saying, hey, I saw this. This is interesting. I don't know that I fit all the qualifications, but I'm curious. And that's all you have to do. But we don't. And so meanwhile, the guys are like this, and we're wondering like, how are they just keep moving along because they've raised their hands? So from an individual side, we have to figure out how. Maybe you don't have to be like me, but what's a comfortable way to kind of raise your hand in something and not be intimidated? if you're going to be hiring or you're trying to have it not be all white non-veterinarian men sitting around a table, then a little more effort for, hey, did you see this? Would you be interested? Or talk to other people and say, do you know other people, and certainly including women that might be interested, and recognize that just because someone doesn't officially put a name in the hat doesn't mean they're not interested or they're not really qualified. And then it does take a little bit more encouragement and you can do it. And I have probably some of the most rewarding relationships I have along the way as a female leader have been sort of the behind closed doors with other female women, and where we're talking about okay, what's the strategy? How are we going to do this? And let's kind of plan this out, and the push we need to give each other to really, really, make sure that their voices are heard around the table. And I mean, we have to get out of our own way on it in so many ways, and networking is a huge piece of this. I kind of cringed, to me, networking just felt so salesy and so artificial and so much I don't know. I just had this image of there's a local community networking thing. You're just going to get 100 business cards handed to you and somebody wants to sell you insurance and instead of no, it's relationship, and networking is learning. We're good learners, and networking is sharing. We share, we teach, we talk to people about what's going on. So if we reframe it as I'm going to go to a learning and sharing event instead of a kind of cheesy, painful sounding networking event, it's easier. And it doesn't have to be a totally random one in your community that's not vet focused, but every single veterinary meeting you go to, if you really, really look at the entire agenda, and instead of oh, I'm going to pick up this CE course, I'm going to go to, pick up that. There are so many opportunities, and people just need to do it. And I'm not an introvert, and I'm very social, and I need connection, and I'm extroverted, but I'm not actually, crazy extroverted. It doesn't mean I'm going to walk into a room. I know some people see a big room of people they don't know, and they're oh yeah, I'm on fire for this. That is not me. And I think some people would find that surprising. I'm okay, you can do this. And just start in on the conversations, and most people feel a little bit awkward about it, but it never is bad. Even if you meet somebody and you're well, never talk to that person again or whatever, you're nice to meet you. And it's learning. And the curiosity that we all have to be veterinarians in the first place applied in a slightly different manner.
Yeah. And I love the supportive environment that you keep talking about. You were working with other female leaders to get encouragement, because I also have heard that because there seems to be so few seats at the leadership table for women, it can be more competition than actually encouraging. And I don't think that that's a good approach at all. And I like to feel that in veterinary medicine, we tend to be a really good collegiate group that, if you hear someone is a veterinarian or a vet tech, you just have this instant bond of oh, family. And so I think that's also something to highlight, is that support network that also comes from building relationships. That's huge. Whether you want to be a C-suite or if you want your next job, those relationships are really what help you in your career, but also is the rewarding part as well, is the people that we remember.
Yeah, very much so. And you might not even know what you're looking for in your career. You might not, some people might be oh, I'm on this path, and I recognize that, there aren't that many roles. And so I won't be the only person. But there's also the I just love my profession, my career, people. And then you have a conversation and suddenly a new door opens and a new opportunity opens, or you find something you're really interested in. And for example, Brett Mayab, who you mentioned, who I adore, he has always had a bit of a passion about personal finance and helping veterinarians now sort of recognizing you can have a conversation oh, I kind of like personal finance. And a lot of veterinarians are not at all do I like that. And it's probably because we feel we don't really understand it. We don't have a degree in it. So therefore, how could possibly, but Brent kind of parlaying his interest and having more conversations with veterinarians and constantly being encouraged to be oh my gosh, there's such a need here. Please, bring this, your passion and your knowledge in a different area into the veterinary space even more for us.
Yeah. And back to what I said is that, we hear somebody else as a veterinarian and there's just this natural, openness and fondness, but also that works with trust too. So if Dr. Mayab comes and talks about finances, people are probably a lot quicker to listen and want to hear what he has to say versus someone who's from more the financial field where it feels salesy and you're just you know. So you can bring so much value by bringing those unique skill sets, I believe, into the veterinary environment.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, before I forget, because this is the other thing that I would really like you to explain. If you had to explain what a CMO or a CVO does, how in the world do you put that into words?
Well, I'll start with the long version that like nobody has done a really good job of it. I am happy that I'm part of the founding board of the BCVMO, the Board of Chief Veterinary Medical Officers. And it started with some of us in these jobs, literally like standing around chatting over a cocktail at one of the big veterinary events. And then it kind of grew and grew and grew and grew. And then we realized like there is a need for all of us in these senior medical leader roles, whatever, if it's a CBO, a CMO, whatever it is, to get together. Some of it is for sure the networking piece of it and how valuable that is. Some of it is the like learn to have a voice because so many people, I'm not really invited to some of these meetings. Like you should be invited to the big meetings and have your voice. There's encouragement that goes along with it. Finding topics that we feel like we should be the ones that are leading the discussion on this, and how do we kind of organize ourselves to do it? I mean, there's no question that there's to be a good veterinarian and in the medical world, I think the constant like triage and multitasking that kind of happens is necessary when you're in clinics. And sometimes it's not our best friend when we're trying to like, okay, this is what we're going to organize ourselves on. This is how we're going to lay out what our goals are. But coming together as a group, that helps. Because in general, I think the role it's extremely important for all of the medical people in whatever your group is to see a medical leader, just see themselves. Like, I know that person understands me and has my back on things and will represent what is in my best interest as well as sort of the company. So a visible medical leader is a key piece of it. And then the aspects that I think we all think about, but are not very good at sort of measuring would be, well, are we practicing quality medicine? Are we doing the right thing? We don't ever want to feel like we're losing ourselves. And a lot of this is corporations have gotten bigger and you sort of feel like you have less control. But like representing like, well, we have to practice quality medicine. We are here from the clinical side, obviously, different in some of the other aspects of the industry. But from the clinical delivery side, we are here to serve clients and their pets or their, food animal, equine, whatever it may be. So the concept of visible medical leader, care about quality of medicine and doing the right thing, and very much like keeping people engaged and interested in the profession and keep the pipeline going and have it look attractive to younger generations and to your business, if you're trying to attract people to your business, but overall for the profession.
Yeah, that sounds really fun. I'm sure there's a lot of hard things and to the job that it can be quite stressful as well, because there's a lot that goes with leadership. I'm sure there's some lonely moments because you kind of feel like you're the only one at the time and just the responsibility. But for those who are interested in maybe getting higher up in leadership roles, we've talked about the importance of building relationships. You've also mentioned that you just stayed curious and open to new opportunities that came up. Is there anything else that you might encourage people to do, work on, that would help them get into a better place to be a more senior leader?
Yeah, I think what's your individual passion, right? Like, again, back to the problem solver, you might have some like, oh, I organized this the way we do this in our service, or I started this group in our hospital because everybody had this shared interest. To visibly take something that you're passionate about, no matter how small it is, and do something with it. And don't be afraid to say, hey, I actually, we fixed this process in the way we run our service because we found like it was really challenging for XYZ, obviously making all this up. Or again, in this group that we brought together, it turns out like now we are sharing and these best practices, or we're sharing, in our knowledge in something. And it shows initiative and that you're not afraid to just try something and bring people together. There's an example, a woman who is now I might get the title wrong, but she veterinarian was in practice and then was with Banfield and was sort of in area medical, and then kind of tried to make the switch into operations. And now she's leading one of the countries in Anacura. She moved her family. But one of the things she did Well, she really liked the business side. So she's like, I'm going to just see at one of our big meetings if anybody will come. If I post like, hey, over lunch, do you want them to come talk about the business side? And there's no plan. And like fast forward, for sure, that played a role on why she's now leading one of the countries for Anacura. So tiny little things that you're interested in, you don't have to make it super complicated. Just do it, start it, and don't be afraid to have there be visibility around it.
Yeah. Take action where you are. It sounds like it is a good place to start. And I know we're running out of time and you have a new, I hate to call it project, but there's another thing that you're working on right now, which is fun. And I think the first hospital is opening in 2025, I think is what I read. So I know that is occupying a lot of what you do, but maybe a couple questions for you. Is there anything on your bucket list that you would like to do?
The professional bucket list with this new project, which is essentially a sister company to CityVet, which is a shared ownership model for general practitioners. I'm now the president of Arista Advanced Pet Care, and it's a shared ownership for multi-specialty and emergency. So there is a little bit the professional bucket list would be, I went from, arguably the biggest medical leadership role, one could be in, to becoming a president. I, by the way, did never take my own advice. I wasn't like, me, make me president. I fortunately had a lot of people around me that were like, all of these things are coming together, the people, the timing, the whole thing. So the professional bucket list to sort of go from this medical role into a president role where you see the path to presidents. Like, why wouldn't it be veterinarian all the time in the veterinary industry? And instead, it, comes up from typically operations. And so that's a big piece of like, I'm in it right now. I better do a good job because part of my bucket list and part and parcel with it is there are a few sort of operational things that I think we just need to change and replace the focus on outcomes and value. And so I have a professional bucket list need to make sure that like, not only can I show that I can be successful, transferring from veterinary leadership as a female into president role, but also have an impact on the way we are delivering care and the outcomes. So that's a big piece. Personally, with lots of my, female leader friends and the various things we talk about. And like, I do love like entrepreneurial little businesses and maybe not something as complex as what I've got going on right now, but like, I got a whole list of things that like, once I feel like I've done everything that I can for what I'm currently in, starting little companies, bringing together women and leadership retreats and groups. I've got a project I'm building out a space on the Washington coast that will hopefully be for retreats and leadership events. And so there's, bucket listy things there. A lot of it is also just, travel and connecting with people. So,
yeah, I think it's so important to have those. That's always in your mind. It keeps you really excited about the future. And so I'm glad to hear that you're doing that. And sounds like those are going to be some really fun things. And then finally, what is something you are most grateful for?
Oh my gosh, there are a lot of things I'm grateful for. And I'm very much a believer in everyone just take the time to be grateful. Like if it's your morning routine, if it's a random time frame. But I am really, really grateful for all of my incredibly tight friend networks. I don't have children. My life has rolled out a little bit differently in that way. Man, am I grateful for all my incredibly good friends. Many, 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 many are female. I'm not like anti-guy friends. I have lots of great guy friends, but I draw strength all the time from my incredible crowd of female friends.
I hope you enjoyed this fascinating veterinary story. We can make an impact in so many places. Check out the show notes for lots of resources. Please make sure you are subscribed on your podcast app, subscribe on the YouTube channel, and follow me on LinkedIn where I hang out the most. You can contact me on LinkedIn, on the website at vetlifereimagined.com. And brand new is that you can text me. To send me a text message, find the link at the top of the show notes below that says, send us a text message. I want to thank our longtime sponsors, Fire Consulting and Will Hughes, who support the podcast over on our hosting platform, Buzzsprout. You can support the podcast too. Just check out the show notes for a link. And I hope to see you next time on Vet Life Reimagined.